Whispers in stone, minarets cry, blades rise.
They were born in different lands, one in the shadows of the Bosphorus, one in the mountains of Persia, one along the great rivers of India. But they all burned with the same hunger, for faith, for glory, for empire. The 15th century ended not with peace, but with the low rumble of cannons echoing across 3 continents. These were not kingdoms of old, they were something new. Empires forged in smoke and steel, in gunpowder and prayer. They did not just fight wars, they rewrote civilization. In the West, the Ottomans rose from shattered Seljuk ruins to conquer Constantinople and stare down Christendom. In the East, the Safavids painted their swords with prophecy, turning Shia Islam into the heart of a Persian rebirth. And in the South, a young Timurid prince named Babur marched through dust and blood to build a dream called the Mughal Empire. They were the Gunpowder empires, a triangle of power, faith, fire, and fate. And though each would rise to touch the heavens, their stories would all end the same way, with silence. There are stories carved in stone, hidden in tombs, whispered through ruins. Secrets they never taught in school, because some truths were never meant to be told. Here on Secrets of the Ancient World, we don't just explore history, we decode it, piece by piece, lie by lie, until the truth finally rises. If you've ever felt like the past was deeper than what they told us, if you're drawn to the shadows beneath the pyramids and the questions buried beneath centuries of silence, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Secrets of the Ancient World and discover what was never meant to survive time. Before the cannon fire, before the silk-draped courts, there was only dust, decay, and ambition. The world that birthed the Gunpowder empires was fractured and fragile, a patchwork of dying dynasties, forgotten caliphates, and rulers who still clung to swords while the age of fire crept upon them. The Mongols had come and gone. Their empire, once mighty enough to terrify the earth, had splintered into silence. In the vacuum, chaos. In Anatolia, small Turkish beyliks fought over scraps of Seljuk territory. One of them, the Ottomans, was little more than a frontier tribe. No great palaces, no holy armies, just survival. But at their edges, Rome still breathed, in the walled city of Constantinople, fading but proud. In Persia, the land groaned under foreign boots. Timur had burned cities and shattered kingdoms, but left no heir strong enough to hold his ash-covered throne. 1,000 factions claimed God's will. None could hold it. In India, the Delhi Sultanate once ruled the north with the sword and Quran. Now it cracked like old marble, weakened by rebellion, famine, and warlords carving out fiefdoms. Everywhere, tension. The courts were lavish, but their foundations hollow. Princes smiled with gold teeth, while sharpening blades behind curtains. Across these lands, the sound of the old world breaking was muffled, like the hush before a storm. But in that hush, 3 names were already taking root. Osman's blood, dreaming of empire. Ismail's fire, cloaked in divine prophecy. Babur's exile, haunted by the ghosts of Genghis and Timur. And far beyond their borders, the Europeans were learning the art of smoke and flame. Gunpowder, no longer a toy of the East, but a weapon of fate. The world was changing. The old empires didn't know it yet. But the match had already been struck. Osman, Ismail, Babur. 3 names, 3 paths, 1 fire. They were not born emperors. They were born in ruins. In the rugged frontier lands of Anatolia, under the watchful sky of an empire that no longer ruled, a boy named Osman inherited little but grit. His father was a tribal chief, respected, but small in the eyes of power. But Osman dreamt large. He listened to dervishes speak of conquest as destiny. And one night, he dreamed of a tree growing from his chest, its branches spreading over the world. It was no ordinary dream. His court took it as divine. The Ottomans would not just fight, they would rule. Osman would forge an empire in the cracks of collapsing civilizations, with Islam in one hand and a sword in the other. Further east, amidst the stormy highlands of Ardabil, a child was born into both poetry and prophecy, Ismail. His father was a leader of the Safavid order, a Sufi brotherhood draped in mysticism and martyrdom. When Ismail was barely a boy, enemies murdered his family. He disappeared, but not forgotten. Whispers followed him through the forests and caves where he hid. He was said to be more than a man, a miracle, a flame wrapped in flesh. At just 12 years old, Ismail would emerge with hair like fire and a sword blessed in blood. He didn't just want a throne, he wanted to reshape faith itself, to turn Shia Islam into the soul of a new Persian empire. And in the valleys of Central Asia, where snow melted into the blood of fallen warriors, a boy named Babur was born under shadow and legend. He was descended from Timur the Lame and from Genghis Khan himself. But all he inherited was exile. At 12, he became a king. At 15, he lost his city. At 20, he wandered, not as a conqueror, but as a fugitive prince. Babur was not like the others. He wrote poetry about gardens. He cried when his soldiers died. But beneath his softness, there was steel. He crossed the Hindu Kush with a dream, not just to reclaim lost glory, but to build a kingdom in India where Persian elegance and Timurid power could live again. Each of them was shaped by sorrow, by violence, by prophecy, and each believed, without question, that their rule was not chance, but fate. The world didn't see them coming, but in villages and deserts, mountains and marshes, their names were already becoming prayers or curses. They would rise from ash, not as kings, but as storms. Empires don't start with coronations. They start with a decision, a spark, a breath before the fire. For Osman, the spark came with a single castle. Bithynia, a decaying Byzantine outpost, ripe for the taking. He seized it not with overwhelming strength, but with a belief that no border was too sacred. When others hesitated, Osman marched. He declared war not only on a dying empire, but on the very map of the world. And when his son Orhan breached the walls of Bursa, what had been a band of horsemen became a state. The Ottomans had planted their banner, and it would not fall. For Ismail, the spark was blood. At 14, he gathered 7,000 Kizilbash warriors, fiercely loyal, red-turbaned, fearless. He rode into battle like a storm, wielding not just a sword, but the cries of those who believed he was the Mahdi, the guided one. He carved through rivals like scripture on flesh. In 1501, he marched into Tabriz, stood before the ruins of old Persia, and declared himself Shah of Iran. Not Sunni, not divided, but Shia, and his empire would reflect that fire. For Babur, the spark came through smoke from cannons, borrowed from his unlikely allies, the Ottomans. In 1526, he faced the Delhi Sultanate at Panipat. He was outnumbered, surrounded. The sky turned black with dust and fear. But Babur had something ancient India had never seen: gunpowder, discipline, range. The matchlocks roared, the cavalry danced between cannon fire, and the old Sultan's army shattered like glass. By sunset, Babur stood victorious. The Mughals had come, not just to raid, but to stay. This was the age when swords became rifles, when whispers became war cries, when teenage boys became kings. They didn't just want to survive, they wanted the world. And as the smoke cleared, and their enemies lay scattered beneath minarets and cannon smoke, the world realized something. The Gunpowder empires were no longer stories whispered in mosques or mountain passes. They were real, and they had arrived. Now they had lands. Now they had titles. But the world doesn't hand power freely. It must be taken, over and over again. The Ottomans, now a growing force, faced their greatest trial at Kosovo and later at Nicopolis. Their warriors, the Janissaries, were unlike anything Europe had seen. Taken as boys, trained as elite, loyal to the Sultan, not to blood, not to tribe. They marched with rifles slung beside sabers. They stood shoulder to shoulder while European knights charged like thunder. And when the smoke cleared, the old order of crusaders and princes lay in ruins at their feet. In Persia, Ismail turned his eyes toward the sun. He claimed lands from Azerbaijan to Iraq. And the world shook when he faced the mighty Uzbek Khanate at Merv. He crushed them, brutally, decisively. But glory casts long shadows. His greatest test came at Chaldiran, 1514. The Ottomans met the Safavids in full force, swords against gunpowder. Ismail believed his men's faith would shield them. It didn't. Cannons tore through cavalry. Smoke choked the sky. The Safavid banner was trampled beneath iron and flame. Ismail escaped. But something in him died on that field. He would never again lead from the front. Still, the Safavid Empire lived, not by force alone, but by belief. In India, Babur wasn't done. After Panipat, he rode again, this time to Kanwa, where he faced Rana Sanga and a Rajput confederacy that outnumbered him 2-1. The Rajputs were fierce, proud and unyielding. But Babur had changed. He no longer fought for survival. He fought for legacy. He vowed not to retreat. He poured his heart into his men. And once again, gunpowder carved the path. Rana Sanga fell, and the Rajputs broke. Babur now ruled Delhi, Agra, and the heart of Hindustan. He was no longer an exile. He was emperor. These early battles shaped more than territory. They built myth, they bred fear, and they whispered a single truth to their enemies. The age of swords was ending. The age of fire had begun. But behind each flag waved in triumph. The first cracks had already formed. Because fire burns everyone. For a moment, the world bowed. The Gunpowder empires stood at the very height of human civilization. Their banners waved from sea to sea, their palaces glittered like stars, and their names echoed from marketplaces to mountain shrines. This was not mere power. This was empire perfected. In Istanbul, the Ottoman capital, Suleiman the Magnificent ruled over a domain that stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. He was Padishah, Caliph, and lawgiver, a sultan who commanded armies with one hand and rewrote imperial law with the other. His court was filled with architects, poets, scholars, and warriors. The Suleimani Mosque soared above the skyline like a prayer carved in stone. The navy ruled the Mediterranean, and in Europe's darkest whispers, his name replaced that of Caesar. In Persia, Shah Abbas the Great transformed Isfahan into a city of light. He brought silk merchants from the east, diplomats from the west. He rebuilt roads, organized armies, filled libraries. And while the scars of Chaldiran still lingered in Safavid memory, Abbas revived their pride. He armed his men with muskets. He welcomed alliances. And Isfahan, with its blue domes, open bazaars and jeweled mosques became the beating heart of Persian glory. In India, Akbar the Great stood unmatched, the grandson of Babur, but greater in name and vision. He ruled not just by blade, but by wisdom. He abolished the tax on non-Muslims. He held court with Hindus, Christians, Sufis, and Jains. He invited debate and demanded harmony. Under Akbar, the Mughal Empire flourished. Art bloomed. Architecture reached divine heights. Tombs, gardens, palaces of marble and gold. And the empire stretched from the Afghan frontier to the Bay of Bengal. This was the age of stability, of cultural renaissance, of order. And yet, deep beneath the splendor, something stirred. Ambition had no ceiling, faith could still divide, and history does not allow perfection to last. These men, Suleiman, Abbas, Akbar, they could not rule forever. And behind every golden curtain there waited a sun, a rival, a shadow. No empire collapses in a day. It starts with silence, with a whisper, with a pause in the celebration. Behind the golden halls, behind the soaring minarets, the cracks had begun to form. In Istanbul, Suleiman's victories faded into memory, and his court turned inward. The Janissaries, once elite, became corrupted by privilege. Bureaucrats grew fat, and most tragically, the Sultan's own family fractured. Mustafa, Suleiman's most beloved son, was strangled by his own father, convinced by palace whispers and the manipulations of Hurrem Sultan, the Queen Mother. The empire wept. The line of succession, once firm, was now a question soaked in blood. Future sultans would spend their lives behind gilded cages, raised in isolation, unprepared for the world they were born to rule. The Ottomans had tasted too much power, and they had begun to rot from within. In Safavid Persia, Abbas had restored strength, but after him, weakness returned. His successors lacked his fire. The Kizilbash, once loyal, began to splinter. The Ottomans pressed from the west. Afghan warlords pressed from the east. And within the court, ambition turned to paranoia. Rivalries festered in silence. Faith, once a unifier, began to fracture. The line between divine rule and cruel oppression blurred. The Safavid court became a mirror hall. Every reflection seemed trustworthy until it stabbed you in the back. And in India, the mighty Mughal throne trembled from a quiet, invisible war. After Akbar, Jahangir ruled with opium in his veins and paintings on his walls. His court glittered, but he let others pull the strings. His wife, Nur Jahan, became the true force behind the curtain. Brilliant, calculating, and feared. But behind her, others waited. Whispers of betrayal grew loud as his sons plotted war. Brothers turned on brothers. Then came Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal. But even he could not escape the curse of dynasty. His own son, Aurangzeb, would rise, not through diplomacy, but through prison walls and a river of blood. As each empire stood tall, the earth beneath them began to shift. In the west, the Europeans were learning. Dutch ships, British muskets, Portuguese silver. They no longer feared the gunpowder empires. They studied them. And in time, they would come, not to trade, but to conquer. What once looked eternal, a mosque bathed in moonlight, a court full of scholars, a banner rising in wind, now seemed fragile. The shadows were no longer approaching. They were here. And after the rulers fell, what remained? Not silence, but scrambling, grasping, and survival. Empires leave footprints, but they also leave voids. In Persia, the Safavids were gone, but the throne did not stay empty for long. Nadir Shah rose like a ghost, violent, brilliant, merciless. He crowned himself in the ruins of Isfahan. and for a moment, Persia shook the world again. But he ruled not with faith or vision, only with steel. He was assassinated in his sleep. His empire died with him, and Persia fell once more into chaos, fragmentation, and forgotten dreams. What once was a holy empire of poets and prophets was now a prize for warlords. In India, the Mughal name still echoed, but only in title. The empire had become a shell. Regional powers rose from its corpse: the Marathas, the Sikhs, the Nawabs, each carving out their own kingdom in blood and ambition. And then, from across the seas, the British arrived, at first as traders, then as rulers. They found a fractured land, rich, divided, desperate. By the time the last Mughal, Bahadur Shah Zafar, was exiled in 1858, he was not an emperor, but a poet. He died in a foreign land, buried in an unmarked grave. The Mughal sun had set, and it would not rise again. In the Ottoman world, the empire still stood, but not as it once had. The borders shrank, the armies weakened. The sultans listened more to ambassadors than to God. European powers circled like hawks: Russia, Austria, Britain. Treaties were signed with trembling hands, reforms were promised and delayed. And in the shadows, a fire began to grow. Not of empire, but of nationalism. By the 19th century, the Ottoman lands were no longer feared, they were targeted. And though the Ottomans would last longer than the others, they too were dying. Slowly, quietly. The age of the Gunpowder empires had ended. What followed was not peace. It was replacement. Colonizers, reformers, rebels, new flags, new gods, new rules. But in the broken cities, beneath the old domes, their shadows still stretched, and the people still whispered their names. They are gone. The cannons are cold. The palaces are ruins. Their names echo only in prayers and textbooks. But empires never truly die. They become ghosts, woven into the language, the architecture, the rhythm of daily life. And if you listen, you can still hear them. In Istanbul, the call to prayer still floats over the Bosphorus. The great domes of Suleymania still hold the sky. Men sit in tea houses quoting Suleiman's poets, and in quiet moments you still see the outline of the old empire. Not in soldiers, but in streets. Not in banners, but in songs. The Ottoman legal system? Its echoes still whisper in Turkish courts today. The title, Pasha, still spoken with reverence. In Iran, the fire of the Safavids still burns. Shi'ism, once regional, fragmented, repressed, is now the soul of the nation. Isfahan, though bruised, remains one of the most beautiful cities on earth. Blue tiles, whispering fountains, a city of memory. In every prayer book, every line of Persian poetry, the Safavids linger, not as conquerors, but as curators of culture. And in India, the Mughal name, though buried, rises again in symbols. The Taj Mahal, built by an emperor for his lost queen, stands not just as a monument of love, but of empire, art, and ambition. Mughal cuisine fills kitchens from Delhi to Dhaka. Their art hangs in galleries from London to Lahore. Their architecture shapes every Indian capital building, every dome. Even Urdu, the poetic language born of Persian, Arabic, and local tongues, owes its elegance to the Mughal court. The Mughals are gone, but India still walks in their shadow. And beyond borders, beyond time, these empires inspired revolutions, movements, awakenings. Napoleon admired Suleiman. Iranian nationalists invoked Abbas. Rebels in 1857 fought under the name of the last Mughal emperor. And in the independence movements of the 20th century, young Muslims and Hindus alike evoked their ancestors who had once ruled with fire and vision. Today, when people rise and say, "We were great once, we will rise again," it is not myth they speak of. It is memory. The Gunpowder empires are not just stories. They are foundations of language, of law, of culture, of pride. And like all ghosts, they never really left. They rose from fire, from the banks of the Bosphorus, the peaks of Persia, and the plains of India. They were not born into empire. They forged it, with cannons, with prayers, with vision. They reshaped the world with smoke and steel. They were not brothers. They were not allies. But they were bound by ambition, by blood, by destiny. Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal, 3 names, 3 thrones, now dust. And yet, the domes still stand, the languages still sing, the bloodlines still walk the earth. Their time has ended. But the echoes remain in every mosque dome, every courthouse, every tongue that remembers. Because empire never truly dies. It becomes memory, and memory becomes myth. They were not born kings, but they died as empires. And the world never forgot. Another secret brought back into the light. But the ancient world is vast, and its silence is never empty. If this story stirred something in you, if the past felt closer than ever before, then subscribe to Secrets of the Ancient World and walk deeper with us into what time tried to erase. Because the truth was never lost. It was buried